South Carolina, 1859. A boy named Thomas stood knee-deep in the Catawba River, his hands numb from the cold water, searching for something he couldn't name. Music played softly in the background. He was 10 years old. He had been enslaved since birth, and in exactly 3 minutes, he would find something that would alter dozens of lives and end several others. But he didn't know that yet. Right now, he was simply trying to finish his work before the overseer noticed he'd been standing too long in one spot. Thomas worked on the Whitmore Plantation, 200 acres of cotton fields and cruelty on the banks of the river. Master James Whitmore owned 89 enslaved people. In the ledger, Thomas was number 64, listed between a woman named Sarah and a man who'd been dead for 3 years, but never removed from the books. Numbers were easier than names. Numbers kept you from thinking about the people you owned as human. Thomas's job was river work. Every morning before dawn, he waded into the water to check the fish traps, clear debris from the water wheel, and search for anything useful that might have washed downstream. Bottles, tools, pieces of salvageable wood. Whitmore wasted nothing, and that included every minute of Thomas's childhood. The overseer was a man named Cyrus Webb, 34 years old. He had been overseeing for the Whitmore family since he was 19. He was good at his job, which meant he was good at breaking people without killing them, at extracting maximum work for minimum cost, at making enslaved people believe obedience meant survival. He carried a whip but rarely used it. He didn't need to. His eyes did the work. Cold, calculating eyes that saw everything and forgave nothing. On this particular morning, Webb sat on his horse on the riverbank, watching Thomas work. He was in a bad mood. His wife had left him 3 months ago, taking their daughter and moving back to Charleston. She'd said she couldn't live with what he did for a living. Couldn't sleep next to a man who made children work in freezing water. Webb thought she was weak, sentimental. She didn't understand that this was business. This was the natural order of things. Thomas felt Webb's eyes on him and worked faster. He moved along the river's edge, checking each trap. Most were empty. One had a small catfish. He put it in the bucket on the shore and kept moving. That's when he saw it. Something glinted in the shallow water near a cluster of rocks. At first he thought it was glass, maybe a broken bottle. He almost ignored it, but something made him reach down. Curiosity, boredom, fate. His fingers closed around something smooth and heavy. He lifted it from the water. It was a stone roughly the size of a chicken egg, but it caught the early morning light in a way that made Thomas's breath stop. It wasn't glass. It was something else, something that seemed to contain light rather than just reflect it. Clear as water, but with a weight that felt significant. Faces cut into its surface, angles that made rainbows dance across his wet palm. Thomas had never seen anything like it. He stood there transfixed, watching the light play through the stone. It was beautiful, the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. In a life that contained almost nothing beautiful, this stone felt like a miracle. "What you got there, boy?" Webb's voice cut through Thomas's wonder like a knife. Thomas's heart lurched. He'd been so focused on the stone, he'd forgotten the cardinal rule. Never let them see you have something they might want. "Nothing, sir," Thomas said, closing his fist around the stone. "Just a rock." Webb dismounted, his boots squelching in the mud as he walked to the water's edge. "Show me." Thomas's mind raced. He could drop the stone back in the water, pretend it had slipped from his fingers. But Webb had seen him looking at it, had seen the wonder on his face. Lying now would just make things worse. Slowly, Thomas opened his hand. Webb looked at the stone. His eyes narrowed. He reached out and plucked it from Thomas's palm, held it up to the light. The expression on his face changed, shifted from casual cruelty to something else, something hungry. "Where did you find this?" His voice was quiet now, dangerously quiet. "Right there, sir. In the shallow water by those rocks." Webb turned the stone over in his fingers. He wasn't educated in geology, but he'd been alive long enough to know the difference between glass and something valuable. This was no ordinary rock. The weight alone told him that. The way it bent light, the perfect clarity. His mind was already calculating. He knew a merchant in Charleston who dealt in rare goods, knew the man would pay well for something like this. No questions asked. This stone could be worth hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands, maybe more. "This is mine now," Webb said. Not a question, not even really a statement, just a fact being established. The same way gravity was a fact. The same way Thomas's enslavement was a fact. Thomas said nothing. What could he say? Everything he found belonged to Whitmore. Everything he touched, everything he saw, his very breath belonged to someone else. Of course, the stone did too. But something in his chest hurt. Not fear this time, something else. The loss of that one moment of beauty. That one perfect thing in a life that contained so little perfection. Webb pocketed the stone. "You tell anyone about this boy and I'll make sure you regret it." Understand? "Yes, sir. This is between you and me. Nobody else needs to know about river rocks. You got that?" "Yes, sir." Webb mounted his horse. Before he rode away, he looked down at Thomas with an expression that was almost thoughtful. "You find anything else interesting in that river, you bring it to me first. Before Master Whitmore sees, before anyone sees, you do that. Maybe I'll make sure you get extra rations. Maybe I'll make sure you don't get whipped when the cotton count is short. We got an understanding." Thomas understood perfectly. Webb wanted to keep the stone for himself. Wanted to sell it and pocket the money, without Whitmore knowing. He was asking Thomas to be his accomplice in theft. Except you couldn't steal from someone who owned you. Whatever Thomas found belonged to Whitmore by law. Webb was the thief here, but Thomas couldn't say that, so he just nodded. Webb rode away. Thomas stood in the river, his hand still tingling from where the stone had been. He felt something he'd rarely felt before. Anger. Real anger. Not the kind you swallowed and buried. The kind that burned. That stone had been his. For 30 seconds, it had been his. The only thing in his entire life that had ever been his. And it was gone. Thomas finished his work mechanically, checked the remaining traps, collected the bucket with the single catfish, walked back to the slave quarters as the sun rose higher and the day's heat began to build. He told no one about the stone, not his mother who worked in the big house, not his little sister who was too young to understand, not the old man Ezra who knew more about the world than anyone else in the quarters. The stone was a secret, Webb's secret, and therefore Thomas's secret too. But secrets have a way of growing, of taking root and spreading, of becoming something bigger than they were meant to be. 3 days later, Webb rode into Charleston. The stone was in his pocket, wrapped in cloth. He went to the merchant he knew, a man named Abraham Cross, who dealt in gold, silver, and other valuables. Cross operated out of a small shop near the docks where questions were rarely asked and transactions were rarely recorded. Webb placed the stone on the counter. "I need to know what this is worth." Cross picked it up. His expression didn't change, but Webb saw his fingers tighten slightly. The merchant pulled out a jeweler's lope and examined the stone closely, turned it in the light, weighed it in his palm, set it down, and looked at Webb. "Where did you get this? Does it matter?" "It might, depending on what you want from me." Webb leaned forward. "I want to know what it's worth, that's all." Cross studied him for a moment, then looked back at the stone. "This is a diamond. Not just any diamond. Based on the size, clarity, and quality, I'd estimate it's around 180 carats. Uncut, which reduces the value slightly, but still. He paused. In the right market, to the right buyer, this could fetch anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000, maybe more. Webb felt the floor tilt under him. $5,000. That was more money than he'd make in 20 years of overseeing. That was enough to buy land, to start over, to never have to work for someone like Whitmore again. "I want to sell it," he said. Cross nodded slowly. "I can arrange that, but it will take time. A stone like this, you can't just sell to anyone. You need a buyer with serious money. Someone who won't ask too many questions about provenance. That means discretion. That means waiting for the right opportunity." "How long?" "A few months, maybe. I have contacts in New York, wealthy collectors who like rare pieces. Let me send some inquiries. When I find the right buyer, I'll arrange the sale. You'll get your money, minus my commission." "How much commission?" 20%. Webb wanted to argue, but he knew he had no leverage. He didn't know anyone else who could sell something like this. "Fine, but you keep this quiet. Nobody can know about this stone, especially not James Whitmore." Cross smiled slightly. "Mr. Webb, discretion is what I do. Your secret is safe." Webb left the shop feeling like he was walking on air. $5,000, maybe more. His mind was already planning. He'd wait for the sale, collect the money, then he'd disappear, leave South Carolina, go west, maybe, or north. Somewhere Whitmore couldn't find him. Somewhere he could start fresh with enough money to matter. He never once thought about the boy who'd found the stone. To Webb, Thomas was just a tool that had served its purpose, a shovel that had dug up treasure. You didn't share treasure with shovels. Back at the plantation, Thomas worked and said nothing. But he thought about the stone constantly, thought about where it had come from, thought about whether there might be more. The Catawba River ran for miles through the Carolina Piedmont. It came down from the mountains, carrying sediment and debris, and occasionally things of value. Thomas knew from listening to the old man Ezra that long ago people had found gold in these rivers. The Carolina Gold Rush in the 1820s had brought prospectors from all over. Most of the easy gold was gone now, but that didn't mean the river was empty. If there was one diamond, maybe there were more. Thomas began to pay closer attention to the river. He memorized where he'd found the first stone, started to understand the way water moved, where heavy objects might settle. He found nothing for weeks, but he kept looking. 6 weeks after finding the first diamond, Thomas found the second one. This one was smaller, maybe half the size of the first, but it had the same clarity, the same way of catching light. Thomas's heart hammered as he pulled it from the water. He looked around. Webb wasn't there. He was up at the big house dealing with some problem with the cotton gin. Thomas had a choice. He could tell Webb immediately, follow the agreement they'd made, or he could hide it. He hid it. He wrapped the stone in a piece of cloth and buried it under a loose board in the quarters where he slept. His mother watched him, but said nothing. She'd learned long ago that sometimes survival meant not asking questions. Over the next 3 months, Thomas found 4 more stones, none as large as the first, but all valuable, all diamonds. He hid each one, building a small collection under that loose board. He didn't know what he was going to do with them. He just knew that Webb had taken the first one, and these were going to stay his. Even if he could never sell them, even if they had to stay buried forever, they were his. But secrets that valuable don't stay buried forever. It was Thomas's little sister who changed everything. Her name was Grace. She was 7 years old. She'd been watching Thomas for weeks, noticing how he'd started acting strange, How he'd check under the floorboard when he thought no one was looking. How he'd come back from the river sometimes with his hand closed tight around something. Children are curious, and children who grow up in slavery learn to notice everything because noticing things can mean survival. One day, while Thomas was at the river, Grace lifted the floorboard. She found the cloth, wrapped bundle, opened it, saw the stones inside. She didn't know what they were. She just thought they were pretty. Shiny rocks her brother had collected. She took one of the smaller ones, wanting to show her friend Hannah. She carried it outside, held it up to the light, made rainbows dance across the dirt, and Cyrus Webb saw her. He was riding past the quarters, heading to check on the field workers. He almost didn't stop, but something about the way the light reflected off the object in the girl's hand caught his attention, made him pull his horse to a stop. "Girl, come here." Grace froze. She knew that tone. Everyone knew that tone. It was the tone that meant trouble. She walked over slowly, the stone still in her hand. "What's that you got?" Grace held it up. "Just a pretty rock, sir. My brother found it." Webb felt something cold slide down his spine. He dismounted and took the stone from her hand. Examined it. It was another diamond. Smaller than the first one he'd taken, but unmistakably the same thing. "Where did your brother find this?" "In the river, sir. He finds lots of pretty things in the river. Lots of things like this." Grace nodded, not understanding the danger she was in, not understanding what she'd just revealed. Webb's mind was racing. That boy had been holding out on him, had been finding more diamonds and keeping them hidden, had been lying by omission every single day for months. The anger that rose in Webb wasn't about the theft. It was about being outsmarted by a slave child, about being made to look like a fool, about having something valuable that should be his going to someone who had no right to own anything. "Take me to where your brother keeps these rocks," Webb said quietly. Grace led him to the quarters, showed him the loose floorboard. Webb lifted it and found the bundle, unwrapped it, counted 4 more stones, each one potentially worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. His face went pale, then red. He wrapped the stones back up and put them in his pocket. Then he grabbed Grace by the arm. "Where's your brother?" "At the river, sir." Webb dragged her outside, mounted his horse, and rode to the river with Grace running alongside, struggling to keep up, starting to understand that something bad was happening. Thomas saw them coming. Saw the expression on Webb's face, saw his sister's tears. He knew immediately what had happened. He'd been discovered. Webb dismounted. He walked straight to Thomas and backhanded him across the face. Thomas went down hard, tasting blood. "You thieving little bastard," Webb said. His voice was shaking with rage. "I gave you a chance. I told you to bring me anything you found, and you held out on me. You stole from me." Thomas wanted to point out that you couldn't steal what was never yours to begin with. That the stones belonged to Whitmore. If they belonged to anyone, that Webb was the thief here. But he knew saying any of that would just get him killed. "I'm sorry, sir," he said instead. "I was wrong. Damn right you were wrong." Webb pulled the bundle of stones from his pocket. "How many more are there? How many have you hidden somewhere else?" "That's all of them, sir. I swear." Webb kicked him in the ribs. Thomas curled into a ball, trying to protect his vital organs. Grace was crying, begging Webb to stop. Webb ignored her. "You know what the punishment is for theft, boy?" Thomas knew. He'd seen it before. They cut off your hand, or they branded you, or they sold you so far south you'd never see your family again, or they just killed you and said you tried to run. "Please, sir," Thomas gasped. "I'm sorry. I won't do it again." Webb stood over him, breathing hard. His mind was calculating. If he punished Thomas properly, Publicly, it would raise questions. Whitmore would ask what Thomas had stolen. Webb would have to explain about the diamonds. And then Whitmore would want to know about the first one, the one Webb had already sold through Abraham Cross for $400, of which Webb had pocketed $120 after Cross's commission. If Whitmore found out about that, Webb would be the one punished, probably prosecuted for theft. At minimum, he'd be fired and blacklisted. At worst, he'd be in prison. Webb looked at Thomas with cold calculation. The boy was a problem that knew too much. There was only one way to solve that problem permanently. "Get up," Webb said. Thomas struggled to his feet, one arm wrapped around his injured ribs. Grace stood nearby, still crying. "You're going to have an accident," Webb said quietly. "You're going to slip on the rocks, hit your head, drown in that river." Tragic, but these things happen. Enslaved children die all the time. Nobody asks too many questions. Thomas's blood went cold. He understood with perfect clarity that Webb was going to kill him right here, right now, and there was nothing he could do about it. But Grace didn't understand. "No," she screamed. "No, you can't. Please, sir. He didn't mean nothing by it, please." Webb looked at her, looked at the problem she represented. She knew about the stones, too. She could talk. Children talked. He was realizing he might have to kill both of them. That's when they heard the horses approaching. Multiple horses. Webb turned and saw James Whitmore riding toward them with two of his guests, wealthy planters from Virginia who were visiting the plantation. They'd been out for a morning ride, and the commotion had drawn their attention. Webb's face went carefully neutral. He stepped back from Thomas, trying to look like nothing unusual was happening. Whitmore reined in his horse. "Webb, what's going on here?" "Just disciplining a worker, sir. Nothing to concern yourself with." Whitmore looked at Thomas, bloodied and holding his ribs. Looked at Grace, crying. Looked at Webb, whose face was flushed and whose hand was resting on the whip at his belt. Seems like rather severe discipline for river work. One of the Virginia planters spoke. He was an older man, Samuel Prescott, who had a reputation for being more moderate in his treatment of enslaved people. Not kind, just less casually cruel. Webb felt trapped. He couldn't kill the children now, not with witnesses. But he also couldn't let them talk. "The boy was caught stealing, sir," Webb said, thinking fast. "Small items from the main house. I was administering appropriate punishment." Thomas's mother had appeared from somewhere, drawn by Grace's screams. She stood at a distance, her face carefully blank, but her hands were clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. Whitmore frowned. What did he steal? Webb's mind raced. He couldn't mention the diamonds. "Food, sir. Bread from the kitchen." "That hardly seems worth this level of violence," Prescott said. "The child looks half-starved." "Of course he stole food." Whitmore looked annoyed, not at Webb's cruelty, but at the fact that it was happening in front of his guests. It made him look bad. Made his plantation look poorly managed. "Enough, Webb. Take the boy to the quarters. His mother can tend to him. We'll discuss his punishment later." It wasn't mercy. It was just inconvenient timing. But it saved Thomas's life, at least for the moment. Webb had no choice but to comply. He grabbed Thomas by the collar and dragged him toward the quarters, Grace running alongside. Thomas's mother followed at a distance, knowing better than to intervene. Once they were out of sight of Whitmore and his guests, Webb shoved Thomas into the cabin they shared with 3 other families. He leaned in close, his breath hot on Thomas's face. "This isn't over," he whispered. "You stay quiet about those stones. You tell anyone at all, and I'll kill you and your whole family. Your mother, your sister, everyone. You understand?" Thomas nodded. "I'm going to be watching you every second." One wrong move, one wrong word, and you're done. Webb left. Thomas collapsed onto the dirt floor. His mother and sister rushed to him. His mother examined his injuries with practiced hands. The ribs were bruised, maybe cracked, but not broken. The cut on his face would heal. He'd survive. But they all knew the truth. Webb was going to kill him. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon, as soon as the opportunity presented itself, as soon as there weren't witnesses around. Thomas had to run, or he had to die. There was no third option. That night, as his mother cleaned his wounds, Thomas told her everything. About the first diamond Webb had taken. About the others he'd found and hidden. About Webb's plan to sell them and keep the money. About the threat Webb had made. His mother listened in silence. When he finished, she sat back and looked at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering in one lifetime. "You have to tell Master Whitmore," she said. "Webb will kill me." "He's going to kill you anyway, baby. At least if you tell Master Whitmore. You have a chance. Webb is stealing from him. Rich white men don't like being stolen from. Even if you're the one who gets hurt, at least Webb goes down too." Thomas understood what she was saying. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't about salvation. It was about revenge. If Thomas was going to die, he could at least make sure Webb paid for it. But there was a problem. Master Whitmore won't believe a slave child over his overseer. His mother smiled sadly. "That's where you're wrong, baby. You forget. I work in that house. I hear things. I know things. And one thing I know is that Master Whitmore has been suspicious of Webb for months. Money hasn't been adding up right. Supplies going missing. Webb living a little too well on an overseer's salary. Whitmore don't trust him. He's just been waiting for proof." She reached into her apron and pulled out a small pouch. Inside were the 4 remaining diamonds that Webb had confiscated. Thomas stared at them in shock. "How did you?" "I'm a housemaid, child. I'm invisible. While Webb was dealing with you, and Master Whitmore was entertaining his guests, I went into Webb's room and found these. He'd hidden them in his coat pocket. Careless man, leaving valuables where a thieving housemaid could find them." She pressed the pouch into Thomas's hand. "Tomorrow morning, you go to Master Whitmore. You tell him everything. You show him these. And you pray that his greed is bigger than his racism. Because if he wants those diamonds bad enough, he'll believe you. And if he believes you, Webb is finished." Thomas looked at the stones in his hand. They caught the lamplight and threw tiny rainbows across the wall. These stones had seemed like a miracle when he'd first found them. Then they'd seemed like a curse. Now they were his only chance at survival. He just hoped that chance was enough. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He lay on his thin pallet, the pouch of diamonds hidden under his shirt, feeling them press against his chest like 4 small stones of judgment. Every sound made him jump. Every footstep outside made him think Webb was coming to finish what he'd started. His mother sat by the door, keeping watch. She hadn't slept either. Grace had finally cried herself into exhaustion and lay curled beside Thomas, her small hand gripping his sleeve, even in sleep. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the gaps in the cabin walls, his mother spoke. "It's time." Thomas sat up, his ribs screaming in protest. Everything hurt. His face was swollen where Webb had hit him. But pain didn't matter now. Survival mattered. His mother helped him stand. She straightened his shirt, tried to make him look as presentable as a beaten slave child could look. "You go to the back door of the main house. You ask for Master Whitmore. You don't talk to nobody else. Not the other housemaids, not the butler. Just Master Whitmore. You understand?" Thomas nodded. "And baby," her voice cracked slightly, "whatever happens, I'm proud of you. You're the bravest person I know." Thomas wanted to say he wasn't brave, He was terrified. But the words wouldn't come. He just hugged her tight, careful of his injured ribs, then slipped out of the cabin. The plantation was just beginning to wake up. Other enslaved people were emerging from their quarters, heading to their various jobs. Thomas kept his head down and moved quickly toward the main house. He could feel eyes on him. People knew something had happened yesterday. Word spread fast in the quarters. But no one stopped him. No one asked questions. He reached the back door of the main house and knocked softly. Too softly. He knocked again, harder. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The door opened. A housemaid named Martha looked out, saw Thomas, and frowned. "Boy, what are you doing here? You supposed to be at the river." "I need to speak to Master Whitmore, ma'am." "It's important." Martha's frown deepened. "Master Whitmore, don't speak to field workers. Whatever you got to say, you say it to Mr. Webb. It's about Mr. Webb, ma'am. Please. It's important." Something in Thomas's voice must have convinced her. Or maybe it was the desperation in his eyes, or the bruises on his face. She hesitated, then nodded. "Wait here." She closed the door. Thomas stood on the back steps, exposed, vulnerable. Any moment Webb could come around the corner. Any moment this could all fall apart. The door opened again. This time, it was Master Whitmore himself. He was a tall man, thin with graying hair and cold blue eyes. He wore a silk dressing gown and held a cup of coffee. He looked annoyed at being disturbed. "What's this about, boy?" Thomas had rehearsed this moment in his head all night, but now that it was here, the words tangled in his throat. He forced them out. "Sir, I found something in the river. Something valuable. Mr. Webb took it from me and told me not to tell you. But then I found more. And Mr. Webb, he's been selling them, keeping the money for himself." Whitmore's expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation. You have proof?" Thomas pulled the pouch from his shirt, opened it. The 4 diamonds caught the morning light and blazed like captured stars. Whitmore's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. His eyes locked onto the stones. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, very carefully, he set down his cup and took the pouch from Thomas's hand. He picked up one of the diamonds, held it to the light. His breathing had changed, become faster. "Where did you find these?" "In the Catawba River, sir. About 6 weeks ago, I found a big one, bigger than all these together. Mr. Webb saw it and took it, said it was his now. Told me if I found more to bring them to him first. But I didn't, sir. I kept them. And yesterday Mr. Webb found out. And he beat me, and he said he was going to kill me, because I knew about the first stone, the one he sold." The words tumbled out in a rush. Thomas couldn't stop them now. Everything came pouring out. How Webb had threatened him. How Webb had tried to kill him at the river. How only Master Whitmore's arrival had saved him. Whitmore listened to all of it, his face unreadable. When Thomas finished, there was a long silence. Then Whitmore said, "Come inside." Thomas followed him into the house, into the room that served as Whitmore's study. It was the most opulent space Thomas had ever seen. Books lined the walls. A massive desk dominated one corner. The carpet under his feet was thick and soft. Whitmore sat behind his desk and studied the diamonds. Thomas stood, trying not to shake, trying not to look as terrified as he felt. "You're telling me," Whitmore said slowly, "that Cyrus Webb found a large diamond on my property, sold it and kept the money for himself?" "Yes, sir." "And these stones, where did you hide them?" "Under a floorboard in the quarters, sir. My sister found them and showed Mr. Webb. That's when he beat me." Whitmore nodded slowly. He was thinking, calculating. Thomas could see the wheels turning behind those cold blue eyes. "Do you know what these are worth, boy?" "No, sir. But Mr. Webb seemed to think they was worth a lot." These 4 stones alone are worth perhaps $3,000 to $4,000, maybe more if sold to the right buyer. The larger stone you described, if it was as big as you say, it could be worth 5 times that. Thomas's mind couldn't comprehend numbers that large. He'd never seen more than a few dollars in his entire life. Whitmore leaned back in his chair. Webb has been with my family for 15 years. I trusted him. If what you're saying is true, he's been stealing from me. That's not something I take lightly. It's true, sir. I swear it. The question is, why should I believe a slave child over my overseer? You could have stolen these stones yourself, could be making up this story about Webb to avoid punishment. Thomas's stomach dropped. His mother had been wrong. Whitmore wasn't going to believe him. This was all for nothing. But then Whitmore smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who'd just seen an opportunity. Fortunately for you, I have ways to verify your story. If Webb sold a large diamond, there will be a record. There aren't many merchants in Charleston who deal in such things. It won't be hard to find out. He stood and walked to the door. Called for Martha. When she appeared, he said, "Send someone to fetch Mr. Webb. Tell him I need to see him immediately. Don't tell him why." Martha nodded and disappeared. Whitmore turned back to Thomas. "You're going to stay here in this room. You're not to leave. You're not to speak to anyone. Understand?" "Yes, sir." Whitmore left, locking the door behind him. Thomas was alone in the study, surrounded by wealth he couldn't imagine, holding evidence of a crime he hoped would save his life. 20 minutes later, he heard footsteps in the hall. Multiple sets. Voices. One of them was Webb's. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "Yes, Webb." "Come into my study." The door opened. Webb walked in, saw Thomas standing there, and his face went pale, then red, then very, very still. Whitmore closed the door behind them. He walked to his desk and picked up the pouch of diamonds. "Webb, this boy has made some interesting accusations. He says you found a valuable diamond on my property 6 weeks ago. Says you took it from him and sold it without informing me. Says you threatened to kill him when he found more. Is this true?" Webb's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked to Thomas with pure hatred, then back to Whitmore. "That boy is a liar and a thief. He stole those stones. I caught him yesterday. That's why I was punishing him. So you deny taking a large diamond from him 6 weeks ago, completely. The boy is making up stories to avoid punishment for theft." Whitmore nodded slowly. "I see. Well, that's easy enough to verify. I've already sent a messenger to Charleston, to Abraham Cross's shop on the docks. You know Cross, don't you, Webb?" Webb's face went white. "I may have dealt with him once or twice for small transactions." "Interesting, because I've dealt with Cross myself. He's very good at keeping records, especially for unusual items. I imagine if someone sold him a large diamond 6 weeks ago, he'd remember that, wouldn't you?" The silence in the room was deafening. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat, could hear Webb's breathing becoming faster. "The boy found it." Webb said finally. "Yes, I took it. I was going to tell you, but I wanted to verify its value first. Didn't want to get your hopes up over a piece of glass. And once you verified it was worth over $5,000, you decided to keep that information to yourself." Webb said nothing. "That's theft, Webb. Theft from me, on my property, using my resources. My enslaved worker found that stone while doing work for me. It belongs to me, and you stole it." "I was going to tell you," Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You were going to tell me after you'd spent the money, after you'd planned your escape." "Don't insult my intelligence, Webb. I know exactly what you were doing." Whitmore walked to the door and opened it. 2 large men stood outside, plantation guards. "Mr. Kern, Webb is no longer employed here. Escort him off my property. If he resists, restrain him. I'll be contacting the sheriff about theft charges." Webb looked at Thomas. The hatred in his eyes was absolute. "You little bastard. You've destroyed me." "No," Whitmore said coldly. "You destroyed yourself." The boy just told the truth. The guards grabbed Webb's arms. He struggled briefly, then went limp. They dragged him from the room. His curses echoed through the house until they faded into the distance. When they were gone, Whitmore turned to Thomas. "You did the right thing, boy. I appreciate honesty even from a slave." Thomas said nothing. He knew better than to expect gratitude or reward. But Whitmore surprised him. "The river on my property clearly contains diamonds, possibly many more. This changes things. I'll be organizing a proper search, and you're going to help." "Sir, you found 6 stones. You have a talent for this, an eye for what's valuable. I'm going to put you in charge of river operations. You'll work the Catawba every day. You'll have help. Other workers, but you'll oversee them. Everything you find comes directly to me. No intermediaries, no overseers, just you and me. You do this right. You keep finding stones like these, and I'll make sure you're treated well. Better food, better quarters, maybe even some small compensation. Do we have an understanding?" Thomas understood perfectly. He was being given a different kind of chain. Gilded, but still a chain. He would spend his life searching for diamonds to make Whitmore rich. In exchange, he'd get slightly better treatment than the other enslaved people. It wasn't freedom, but it was survival. "Yes, sir. We have an understanding." Over the next 6 months, Thomas worked the Catawba River with a team of 12 other enslaved people. They searched systematically, covering miles of riverbed. They found 17 more diamonds, none as large as the first, but several were still significant. Whitmore estimated the total value at over $30,000. The story of the Catawba diamond spread. Other plantation owners began searching their stretches of the river. A small diamond rush began. Some found stones. Most found nothing. But the search changed the region, brought attention and money and prospectors. Whitmore became wealthier than he'd been. He expanded his plantation, bought more land, more slaves. He built a new wing on the main house. He treated Thomas slightly better than the others, but only slightly. Better food meant extra rations twice a week. Better quarters meant a cabin Thomas shared with only his immediate family instead of 3 families. Small compensation meant being allowed to keep $1 a month. $1 a month for finding diamonds worth thousands. Thomas learned to hate those stones. Every glint in the water reminded him of what he'd lost. Not just the first diamond, though that still hurt, but something else. Some possibility of a different life. The stones had brought attention to the plantation, had made Whitmore richer and more powerful, had trapped Thomas more completely than chains ever could. He couldn't run now. Every plantation owner in the region knew about the boy who found diamonds. If he ran, he'd be hunted, not just by Whitmore, but by everyone who wanted access to his talent. He was valuable now, and valuable property was guarded carefully. But something was growing in Thomas, something that had started when Webb took that first stone. Anger. Cold, patient anger. The kind that waited. The kind that planned. 2 years after finding the first diamond, Thomas was 12 years old. He'd found 43 diamonds total. Whitmore's wealth had grown exponentially. The plantation now had over 150 enslaved people. The river operation had expanded. Thomas managed 20 workers now, all searching constantly. But Thomas had been doing something else. Something Whitmore didn't know about. He'd been hiding stones. Not many, just one here and there. Small ones that could be concealed, could be overlooked in the daily count. Over 2 years, he'd hidden 7 diamonds. 7 small stones buried in a waterproof pouch in the woods beyond the plantation. 7 stones that represented escape, that represented freedom, that represented a life beyond these fields. He'd also been making contacts. One of the new workers was a man named Samuel who'd been sold from a plantation in Virginia. Samuel had connections, knew people who helped runaways, new routes north, new safe houses. Samuel was planning his own escape, and he'd agreed to take Thomas with him. The plan was simple. Too simple, really, but it was all they had. During the chaos of harvest time, when everyone was working the fields and attention was scattered, they would run. They'd take Thomas's hidden diamonds. They'd head north using Samuel's contacts. They'd sell 1 diamond at a time to fund their journey. 7 stones would be enough to buy their way to Canada, to buy their freedom. It was dangerous. It was probably suicidal. The odds of success were minimal. But Thomas had learned something in his 12 years of life. Anything was better than waiting for freedom that would never come. The night before they were to run, Thomas said goodbye to his mother and sister. He didn't tell them where he was going or when, just held them and whispered that he loved them. His mother understood. Mothers always understood. "You be smart," she whispered. "You be careful. And you live, baby. You live free." The next day, Thomas and Samuel ran. They left during the afternoon, when workers were spread across the fields, and the confusion was maximum. They headed not north immediately, but west, toward the river. Thomas had learned the landscape intimately. He knew paths that weren't obvious, knew places to hide. They retrieved the hidden diamonds. Then they started north, moving fast, avoiding roads, staying to the woods. The alarm would be raised by nightfall. Dogs would be sent out. Posses would form. They had maybe a 6-hour head start. That was all. But Thomas had advantages Webb hadn't had. He knew this land. He'd spent 2 years memorizing every path, every creek, every hiding place. And he had resources. Resources that could buy help. By nightfall, they were 15 miles north. They found a safe house, a tiny cabin where a freed black man named Joseph lived. Samuel had the contact. Joseph was part of the underground network that helped runaways. He gave them food, let them rest for a few hours, then pointed them to the next safe house. They traveled by night, hid by day, used Thomas's diamonds to buy assistance, a wagon ride here, food there, information about where the patrollers were searching. The stones that had trapped Thomas now freed him. One by one, he traded them away for pieces of freedom. The journey took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of terror and exhaustion and narrow escapes. They were almost caught twice. Once they hid in a river for 4 hours, while dogs searched the banks. Once they climbed trees and stayed there until dawn, while a posse camped directly below them. But they made it. They crossed into Pennsylvania, into a state where slavery was illegal, into a place where Thomas was no longer property. He stood on free soil for the first time in his life and cried. Samuel held him while he sobbed, all the fear and pain and anger of 12 years pouring out. They made their way to Philadelphia, to a community of freed blacks and abolitionists who helped them establish new lives. Thomas took a new name, Thomas Freeman. Samuel became Samuel Washington. They were no longer enslaved. They were men. Thomas still had 2 diamonds left. He sold one to pay for housing and supplies. The other he kept, a reminder of where he'd come from, of what he'd survived. He got a job working for a sympathetic white merchant who didn't ask too many questions. He learned to read and write. He learned mathematics. He was smart, sharp, and driven. Within 5 years, he was managing the merchant's accounts. Within 10 years, he'd saved enough to buy his own small business. He never forgot his mother and sister. He sent money when he could through carefully arranged intermediaries. He tried several times to buy their freedom, but Whitmore refused. Whitmore blamed Thomas for Webb's betrayal, for the complications that followed. He wouldn't sell them out of spite. It took the Civil War to free them. When Union troops liberated South Carolina in 1865, Thomas was 30 years old. He traveled south immediately, searching for his family. He found his mother alive, though aged by years of hard labor. His sister Grace had survived too. She was 23, had children of her own. Thomas brought them north, gave them a home, made sure they never wanted for anything. He told them everything about the diamonds, about the escape, about building a life from stones pulled from a river. His mother cried when she saw how far he'd come. "You did good, baby. You did so good." Thomas Freeman lived to be 78 years old. He became a successful businessman, a pillar of Philadelphia's black community. He helped fund schools and churches. He helped other formerly enslaved people establish themselves in freedom. He never forgot where he came from or what it had cost to escape. The last diamond, the one he'd kept, he had set into a ring. He wore it every day of his life. People would ask about it sometimes, about the large, beautiful stone. He'd smile and say it was a reminder. They'd ask what it reminded him of. He'd say, the price of freedom and the fact that some things are worth more than money. After his death, his family found a letter he'd written to be opened after he was gone. In it, he told the full story about finding the first diamond, about Webb's theft, about Whitmore's greed, about the escape, about every moment of terror and triumph. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "That overseer thought he could take what was mine. Thought because I was enslaved I had no right to anything. Not even a stone I found, but he was wrong. He took one diamond. I took 7. He used his to buy a few months of luxury before losing everything. I used mine to buy a lifetime of freedom. In the end, I won. Not because I was stronger or smarter, but because I understood something he didn't. The value of a thing isn't what you can sell it for. It's what you can use it to become." The ring, that last diamond, was passed down through his family. Generation after generation wore it. Each learned the story. Each understood what it represented. Freedom isn't given. It's taken. It's bought. It's earned through courage and pain and sacrifice. And sometimes it glitters in a river, waiting for someone brave enough to claim it. Thomas Freeman found that glitter, and he changed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone who came after him. The overseer who shouted, "This is mine now," learned a hard lesson. Possession is temporary, but freedom, once won, is forever. And the boy who found a diamond in a river learned an even harder one. Sometimes the thing that makes you valuable is the same thing that nearly destroys you. The key is deciding whether you'll let it define you or whether you'll use it to define yourself. Thomas chose the latter, and in doing so, he transformed stones into something much more precious. He transformed them into hope, into legacy, into proof that even in the darkest moments, when everything is taken from you, you can still find something worth more than any diamond. You can find yourself.